Why do you keep returning to the very version of yourself that breaks you? Why do you run to the fire that burned you, kiss the blade that cut you, and sleep beside the ghost that stole your breath? It's not because you're broken. It's because somewhere along the way, the pain became your mirror. The ache became your name, and the identity that hurt you became the only home you ever learned to survive inside. You were praised when you smiled through your wounds, rewarded for being palatable, quiet, selfless to the point of disappearance. And you learned without knowing that to be loved was to hurt, that to be seen was to be a shape someone else needed. And the more you molded, the more you bled, until the mask grew roots and you forgot there was ever a face beneath it. But here's the harder truth. What hurts you also holds you, because familiarity doesn't ask you to grow, it just asks you to remember your role, your place, your pattern. And so the cage begins to feel like comfort. The ache becomes a lullaby. You begin to mistake survival for personality, until one day the lie is so loud it sounds like truth. And the truth? It feels like betrayal. This is why most people don't want healing. Not really, because healing means death. Death of the self they spent a lifetime constructing. Death of the approval they begged for. Death of the identity they built from scars. And when you've spent years stitching yourself from trauma and calling it personality, you don't know who you are without the pain. So you stay, not because it's good, but because it's known. Because it's all you've ever had to hold on to when the world grew cold and no one told you there was another way. So the identity that hurts you becomes your safety blanket, your compass, your language. You speak from it, you love from it, you run from it and into it at the same time. And deep down you start to confuse the ache for love, the wound for truth, the familiar for sacred. And this more than anything keeps you trapped, because when your definition of home is wired to pain, freedom feels like exile. So you stay, believing the cage is who you are, never realizing the lock was never closed, only memorized. What no one warns you about is the withdrawal from this version of self, that aching limbo between who you've been and who you're becoming. It doesn't arrive with clarity, it comes with confusion. You start questioning the people you once admired. You recoil from the mirrors that once affirmed you. You wonder if you're becoming delusional, but you're not. You're detoxing, not from substances, but from self-deception, from performance, from the centuries-old lie that you are only as good as your usefulness to others. And in that detox, you begin to shake. You miss the predictability of the pain. You miss the rhythm of dysfunction, because there at least you knew the steps. Healing feels like stumbling through a dance you've never learned. But keep stumbling. It's the only way through. You'll want to run back many times, back to the comfort of roles, back to the places where your name still echoes like a chant. But if you go back, you'll find it hollow, because once you taste truth, you can't unknow it. The mask begins to itch. The applause starts to sound like static, and your own voice, though soft at first, begins to rise. So let it rise, let it tremble, let it reclaim. Because this journey isn't about becoming someone new, it's about remembering the someone you were before the world told you who to be. That's where your freedom lives, not in adding more, but in shedding, peeling, unlayering, until nothing remains but the raw, wild essence of you. And when you finally meet yourself beneath the pain, the roles, the betrayals, you'll recognize her, or him, or they. And you will weep, not because they were lost, but because you finally came home. You learned to smile with your teeth clenched. You learned to laugh in rooms that drained your spirit, to nod along to stories that silenced your truth. You learned to perform the version of you that made everyone else comfortable. And they loved that version, they applauded that version, but you hated her, or him, or whoever you needed to become to stay safe. Because every time you said yes when you meant no, a piece of you died. Every time you swallowed your fire to keep the room calm, your body screamed in silence. And eventually the mask was all that was left, a hollow echo of your true voice, a mimicry of connection. You became addicted to being liked because it felt like being safe. But safety built on performance is a prison, a cage lined with applause, and deep down, your spirit started banging on the walls, whispering, "This is not who we are." But you kept wearing it, because taking it off would mean being seen, and being seen as you truly are felt more dangerous than being loved for who you're not. The tragedy is, we become so good at pretending that even we forget we're pretending. We build careers, families, even dreams on top of that mask. We build entire lives that never once touch our soul. And the longer we wear it, the more terrifying the truth becomes. Because if you admit the mask, you have to admit the lie. You have to confront the ways you've betrayed yourself just to be chosen. But beneath the grief is something fierce, a pulse, a truth, a presence that refuses to die. It's been waiting, beneath the mask, beneath the persona, beneath the perfect smile. It's your real face. And it is more worthy of love than any mask ever was. And here's the hardest part. When you take the mask off, many people will leave. Not because you were unworthy, but because they were in love with your costume, not your core, but the pain of that loss will become your opening, because what remains will be real, what remains will be you. And in the aftermath, as the dust of performance settles, you will see clearly for the first time. You will remember what it feels like to breathe without holding your stomach in, to speak without calculating every word, to love without wondering if you're too much or not enough. And that memory will awaken something ancient in you, the you before shame, before silence, before survival. The unraveling of the mask is terrifying, but it is also sacred. Because in that unraveling, you aren't just losing false love, you're reclaiming the capacity to receive real love. Love that doesn't require performance. Love that sees through the scars and straight to the soul. So if you feel the mask slipping, let it. If you feel the people backing away, let them. If you feel the truth rising in your throat like a scream you were never allowed to release, scream. Let it out. Let it echo. Let it rip the illusion apart, because nothing you lose in the process was ever meant for the real you, and everything that is yours will meet you there, on the other side of your own becoming. No one tells you that your defense mechanisms will harden into traits, that your people-pleasing will become your default identity, that your distrust will become your lens, that your rage will turn into armor. What protected you in the fire now keeps you from the sun, and over time, the mask becomes muscle memory. You don't even notice the weight of it anymore. It becomes your face. Your trauma doesn't just live in your past, it lives in your habits, the way you answer texts, the way you flinch at silence, the way you push away love, because love felt like betrayal in your formative years. You aren't broken, you're conditioned, but that conditioning feels like self, and so you cling to it, because if you let it go, who are you? A soft thing in a sharp world, a raw nerve in a society that loves thick skin. You've worn your suffering like a badge. And in a way, it saved you. It helped you function when you were drowning. But now, it's choking you, because what once kept you alive is now what keeps you asleep. And until you grieve the version of you that helped you endure, you won't be able to grow beyond her, or him, or them. The truth is, many of your personality traits were never chosen. They were installed by fear, by abandonment, by trauma you never fully understood. And as you begin to awaken, the most painful part is watching pieces of yourself die, pieces you thought were you. The sarcasm, the control, the independence that says, I don't need anyone. They were all born in a time when needing someone meant being hurt. But now you have the power to choose, to respond rather than react, to open rather than shield, to build a self that isn't a reaction to pain, but an expression of truth. And that shift is everything. But it requires mourning. Mourning the coping mechanisms you once celebrated. Mourning the strength that was just numbness in disguise. Mourning the toughness that was really terror. You begin to see that much of what you thought was your essence was really just armor. And the armor served you until it didn't. And as it falls away, you're left with something terrifying, vulnerability. But that vulnerability, it's not weakness, it's access. It's a door. It's the return to feeling, to joy, to presence, to being fully achingly alive. It's learning to sit in a room without over-explaining your existence. It's daring to ask for what you need, not because you've earned it, but because you're allowed to have it. It's the unlearning of survival as your primary language. And slowly, your nervous system recalibrates. What once felt safe, chaos, rejection, abandonment, starts to lose its pull. And what once felt foreign, stability, warmth, calm, starts to feel like home. But the process is uneven. Some days the old you pulls you under with a voice so familiar it feels like gospel. But even then, even in relapse, there's a knowing now, a whisper that says, this isn't me, not anymore. You start to notice your triggers not as enemies but as teachers, each one pointing to a place that still aches, a place that still believes the lie. And instead of running from them, you begin to tend to them. Like wounds in need of care, not judgment, you sit with the fear, not to fix it, but to witness it. And in that witnessing, something sacred happens. You don't just change, you return to yourself, not the self you became to survive, but the self you were before the wound, before the mask, before the forgetting. And the more you return, the more you reclaim. Not just your identity, but your dignity, your voice, your place in the world, no longer shaped by trauma, but by truth. And still, even in the healing, even in the new awareness, there are moments of grief. Grief for the years spent hiding, for the parts of you abandoned just to make someone else stay, for the softness you suppressed to appear strong. The grief doesn't mean you're failing, it means you're remembering. And remembering is sacred. Every tear honors a version of you that got you here. Every ache carves space for more truth. You begin to realize that growth doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like trembling hands making a new choice. Sometimes it's crying in the middle of joy because joy still feels foreign. Sometimes it's sitting with discomfort instead of numbing it. And slowly you start building a new self, not born from protection, but from permission, not shaped by fear, but by presence. This is not about becoming someone better. It's about becoming someone real. And real doesn't mean polished, it means whole. Healing isn't just hard, it's disorienting. Because it strips you of the very map you've used to navigate the world. When you've always known yourself through pain, peace feels threatening. When chaos was your normal, calm feels suspicious. You say you want love, but you chase the ones who replicate your abandonment. You say you want freedom, but you cling to the rules that kept you small. You say you want joy, but you sabotage every soft moment before it has a chance to bloom. Why? Because your nervous system memorized pain as safety. Your subconscious made a religion out of the familiar, and the unfamiliar, even if it's better, feels like death. So you return, not because it's good, but because it's known. You'd rather wear the chains that fit than try on wings that feel too light. And in that way, you stay loyal to your suffering. Not out of weakness, but out of memory. Because the pain may hurt, but it doesn't surprise you. And part of you would rather bleed predictably than risk the terrifying mystery of joy. That's how deep the conditioning runs. Pain becomes identity, familiarity becomes God, and every time you start to step outside the loop, fear drags you back in. You start to wonder if you're cursed, if healing was a lie, but it's not. It's just that healing is not linear, it's not soft, it doesn't come with clear instructions. Healing is chaos, it's breakdowns and withdrawals, and the quiet horror of seeing your old life still standing when your soul is collapsing. And so you retreat into what you know. You go back to the relationship that mirrors your childhood, the job that validates your unworthiness, the routine that numbs instead of nourishes. Because healing demands change, and change demands death, and death, even the metaphorical kind, is terrifying. But you're not weak for feeling scared. You're not broken for resisting the unknown. You're human, and what's familiar is seductive. It whispers to you in your lowest moments, at least you know how this ends. But healing is a blank page, and it takes radical courage to choose that blank page over a script you've memorized by heart. The story you've told yourself, the roles you've rehearsed, the persona you've perfected. They all feel safer than the unknown truth, because in the unknown there's no applause, no familiar pain to ground you, only space, empty, terrifying, infinite space. And yet, this is where the real magic begins, in the spaces where the old story ends and nothing new has been written, in the gaps between identities, in the discomfort of not knowing who you are. That's not failure, that's rebirth, that's the cracking open of every false self to make room for what's true. But first, you'll grieve. You'll grieve the comfort of dysfunction. You'll grieve the praise you got for playing small. You'll grieve the identity you spent decades building, even if it was never yours. That grief is not regression, it's reverence, a sacred mourning for the survival self that kept you alive. And once you honor her, you can release her, gently, gratefully, fully. And what comes next? Stillness, intimacy, a new kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need to perform, doesn't need to fight, doesn't need to ache to feel real, the kind of strength that rests, that breathes, that lets joy in without questioning if it's earned. That's the strength of a soul returned to itself. And in that return, you don't just survive, truly begin to live. What if you couldn't tell your story anymore? What if all the reasons you give for why you are the way you are, your childhood, your heartbreaks, your betrayals, were stripped away? Who would be left? Most people don't want to find out, because we confuse our pain with our personhood. We wear our stories like skin. But stories are just echoes. They're not who you are. They're where you've been. And the deeper truth is, you're terrified of the blank page, the silence, the raw now, because the now has no identity, no narrative, just breathe, just being. And that kind of presence demands everything. It demands the death of the victim, the warrior, the overachiever, the caretaker, all the masks you wore to survive. It demands you stop explaining yourself, stop defending yourself, stop narrating yourself, and just exist. But existing without identity feels like dying, because your mind doesn't know how to process freedom without a frame. So you retreat, back to the comfort of the story, the predictable edges of who you've always been, even if it's killing you. We cling to our stories because they give us structure. They give us something to point to when we feel lost. But at some point, your healing depends on releasing the narrative, not because it wasn't real, but because it no longer serves the you that's emerging, the one who doesn't need to justify their sensitivity, the one who no longer introduces themselves by their wounds. You are more than what happened to you. You are more than your defenses. You are more than your timeline. And it is the scariest, most liberating moment when you finally choose to live from presence, not pattern. When you look at the mirror and see not the story, but the stillness behind your eyes, and that stillness says, you are not what they did. You are not even what you did to survive. You are what remains when the noise fades, and what remains is holy. And still, the pull to go back is strong. It lingers in your muscle memory, in the way you reach for your phone when you're lonely, in the way you shrink in the presence of disapproval, in the way you long for validation from the very places that once rejected you. Because healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering differently, it's noticing the urge and choosing something new. Again and again, you will be tempted to romanticize the pain, to call it home, to mistake the ache for love and the chaos for chemistry. But this time, you will pause, you will breathe. You will ask yourself, is this healing or is this habit? And maybe, for the first time, you will choose stillness over noise, honesty over harmony, self-respect over approval. And in that choice, something tiny and sacred begins to bloom. A new pattern, a new way of being, a self no longer driven by survival but by truth. And truth, while quiet, never lies. It never needs to be defended, it never needs to shout, it simply is. And when you begin to live from that place, you become undeniable, not because of your volume, but because of your presence. Because you're no longer seeking to be enough, you already are. And though the past will whisper, and the pain will beckon, and the mask will glitter under the light of nostalgia, you will know better. You will remember who you are beneath the performance, and you will not go back, not this time. Because now you know the story was never the truth. You are. When the false self starts to crumble, it doesn't go quietly. It claws, it screams, it seduces, it offers you old comforts wrapped in urgency. Just be the nice one again, it whispers. Just go back to who they loved. Just smile, just apologize, just perform. Because the ego doesn't care if you're fulfilled. It only cares if you're safe. And to the ego, safety means familiarity. So as you unravel, it throws a tantrum. It floods you with doubt. It tells you you're wrong, that you're crazy, that you're selfish. But what's really happening is death. The death of who you thought you were. The death of the scaffolding that held up your false identity. And like any death, it's dark, it's lonely, it's raw. You don't know what's real anymore. You don't trust your voice. You don't recognize your face. But this is the fire that frees you. This is the storm that strips away everything that isn't true. You are not breaking. You are being born. And birth is bloody, birth is brutal, birth is sacred. The ego will try to make you feel insane. It will weaponize nostalgia. It will magnify regret. It will dig up old identities like corpses and dress them in perfume, hoping you'll climb back into their skin. But you can't unknow what you've seen. You can't unfeel the truth once it's touched your bones. The ego will scream, but your soul will whisper, and the whisper will say, keep going. It will say, there's something on the other side of this ache. And though you may crawl, though you may sob, though you may question everything, you will keep going. Because something inside you knows this death is not the end. It's the portal. It's the gateway. It's the necessary unraveling before the rebirth. And when the ego finally quiets, when it surrenders, you will feel something extraordinary. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from truth. From alignment, from no longer pretending to be someone you never were. That peace is the sound of your soul exhaling after a lifetime of holding its breath. You will begin to realize that everything you feared losing was never truly yours. The love you chased through performance, the respect you bartered with your silence, the belonging you begged for by betraying yourself, none of it was rooted in truth. It was rooted in illusion. And as the illusion crumbles, so too does the pain of needing it. You begin to see clearly, you begin to breathe differently, you begin to recognize that you never had to become lovable. You only had to remember that you already were. And in that remembrance, you stop running, you stop chasing, you stop contorting, you begin to sit with yourself fully, honestly, deeply, and you discover something you never expected in all that silence. Peace, not perfection, not the absence of struggle, but a presence so real it anchors you through it all. The false self dies, and what rises is not a better version of who you were. It's the true one who's been waiting underneath all along. When the chaos quiets, you're left with something unexpected. Silence, not the kind that avoids, but the kind that reveals. It's a stillness that doesn't demand or explain, and in that stillness, you finally meet yourself. Not the persona, not the mask, just you. And in that moment, you realize you don't need fixing, you just need to be seen by you. This is where the real journey begins, with nothing to defend, nothing to prove, just breath, truth, and presence. It's terrifying, yes, because now every choice has to be yours. Every boundary has to come from your truth, and truth doesn't come with applause. It comes with risk, but it also comes with peace. You stop begging to be seen and start living like you already are. You walk into rooms without shrinking. You hold your voice like it matters, because it does. And love, you no longer chase it, you become it. You are no longer trying to earn a seat, you are building a new table. You spent so long trying to be lovable. But real love was never looking for your mask. It was looking for you, the real, raw, unguarded you. And until you let that part surface, love couldn't land. When you finally take off the mask, not for them but for yourself, everything begins to shift. The right ones stay, the ones who see the truth in your eyes and choose you, not your performance. Your softness stops being your shame and becomes your superpower. And slowly you stop performing intimacy and start living it. You will still be tempted by old patterns, especially when you're tired. But now you know better. Now you can pause, breathe, ask, is this habit or healing? And that question alone can save you. You begin to honor the fire, not because it defined you, but because it refined you. You no longer walk with a limp, but with a memory, a sacred knowing. You survived yourself, and that's everything. In the end, this journey isn't about becoming new. It's about returning to the quiet truth beneath all the noise. You are not your roles, your wounds, your wins. You are not your survival story. You are the one who witnessed it all, and that one is whole. Freedom doesn't arrive in fanfare, it comes in a whisper. In the way you choose yourself quietly in moments no one sees. In the way you stop narrating your worth and start living it. That kind of peace can't be taken, it's yours. You no longer need to explain your sensitivity or justify your boundaries. You live from presence, not pattern. You return to your breath, your body, your being, not to fix, but to feel. And that feeling, it's enough. Let the world call you different. Let them wonder where the old you went. You'll know the truth, they were never real. And now, what remains, what breathes and stands and speaks, is the one who always was. That finally is the miracle.